So good afternoon. Could I have my slides on the screen there? Perfect, yeah. It's great to be back in Austin after only experiencing South by Southwest. It's terrific to see the gentler side of Austin. How many of you, well, I can hardly see you, but how many of you know what the Media Lab is? Raise your hand. Almost nobody. Okay. Well, the Media Lab is it's a research lab at MIT. It's actually one of the better known labs. This is our new building as of a couple of years ago. We, just to give you a little background, we have 80 corporate sponsors in most estimations. It's the most successful academic industry relationship ever invented. Most of the big technology companies, as you can see here, are members of the lab. Now, we're an interesting lab in that we don't have a particular research focus. In fact, we think of ourselves as anti-disciplinary. So the work there ranges from music and opera to exploration of bioengineering and prosthetic devices and helping computers understand human emotions. My group is focused on cities and related technology. And in fact, in my group, I have people from architecture, urban planning, cognitive psychology, computer science, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. And we find that having all these disciplines together allows us to do the kind of work that we do. And at the Media Lab, we have these principles. To some people, they're controversial, but we try to live with them. I'll just mention a few of them. Compass over maps. We think in today's world, things are changing so quickly that you have to be agile. So to develop a roadmap is a little bit silly. You need a good compass direction and good people. Learning over education. We actually don't believe in teaching as much as we believe in learning by doing. Disobedience over compliance. I mean, nobody ever won the Nobel Prize by playing only by the rules. And we try to bring great people together, allow them to think out of the box, and explore areas outside of their own particular discipline. So we're here to talk about cities. So I'd like to give you my very brief history of cities. So settlements typically began around a scarce resource like this well here. And they were very compact because they had to be walkable. In fact, that woman had to walk with a pot of water on her head to her home from the well. They had very similar patterns. This is from 2900 BC. And you can see it was, there were two walls for this city. The inner wall was very high density. It's where people lived and worked and played and produced energy. Food was produced within the outer wall, particularly the high value food like fruit trees. The lower value annual crops were immediately connected to the outer wall. There was a mass transit linkage via a waterway to other parts of the world. Going ahead thousands of years to medieval towns in Europe, essentially the same diagram, okay? They were highly compact, integrated communities. And you literally find hundreds and hundreds of these same diagrams all over the world, in Europe, the Middle East, even in Mexico. And as time went by, settlements began to converge to form larger cities, but each of these neighborhoods, like the 20 arrondissements in Paris, had their own identity. They had their own town center, they were very compact, and people lived and worked and played all within each neighborhood typically. Then with industrialization, things moved outside of the city. Factories were dirty and smelly and noisy, and they were moved to the outskirts. You had sewer and water networks that allowed for expansion. Work became centralized in factories, energy production in power plants. Healthcare was centralized in hospitals, learning in schools. Food production took place increasingly remote from the city, particularly when you had rail networks that allowed for the kind of supply chain the previous panel touched on. And then between 1880 and 1920, you saw this linear expansion of cities along rails. via trolleys. 1920 on, everything changed fundamentally when we had cars. It allowed for low density infill between these rail lines, and this is the model that's typically being followed all over the world right now, which is an auto-centric model of separating functions, connecting everything by a roadway, making sure there's plenty of parking at any possible destination. This is LA, kind of the typical model, but Austin follows that model. You find it in China, in Riyadh, and many other cities. In China, it's a little higher density, but it's still the same auto-centric tower sprawl. This is the experience one has in most cities of the world. I took this out the window of my taxi in Beijing. On a very good day, that sign there is all green and yellow. There's no red. On a bad day, there's red. And you have the same experience in Mumbai. I took this also recently in Mumbai. It took me about 2 hours to go 5 kilometers to the airport, and you have it in Austin. I'm sure you've experienced it here. So what are the societal trends that are impacting city? Because the rules of the game are beginning to change. I think we're in a really interesting time, and we all need to figure this out. 90% of the population growth from here on out will take place in cities. That's really interesting. We do a lot of work in Northern Europe. This is a recent article, I think from about a month ago, 6 big European cities with plans to go car-free. And it's really happening. This photograph I took in Amsterdam, there were cars on it when I was there a year earlier. Now it's closed off to cars. You find this in many places. Millennials, young people, increasingly they're choosing cities over suburbs. They're not buying cars and homes. They're trading space for location. They're transitioning from an ownership society to a sharing economy. There's a lot of talk about this, but we really do see it happening, particularly in places like Boston. This was an article that I snapped a screenshot off from last night. It was an article yesterday. GM invests $500 million in Lyft, planned systems for self-driving cars. Google and Uber and many other companies are looking. This is part of the sharing economy replacing ownership. There's all kinds of new technologies. Another article recently, the high-stakes race to rid the world of human drivers. Humans are really dangerous. And this will happen. A lot of people are skeptical, but I see it happening very rapidly. Another thing that I think is really interesting to realize is that almost all of the innovation is taking place in cities. Something like 93% of patents take place in urban areas, but the world is not flat in this respect. Innovation is taking place in those cities that have the attributes that support a free exchange of ideas and innovation. Austin happens to be one of those cities. We see all over the world a rise of so-called innovation districts where mayors are creating specific places to support innovation. In most cases, they don't really know what that means. So I think everybody's trying to figure out what enables innovation. So let's talk a little bit about innovation because I think this really does impact transportation, if only indirectly. This is a study that we did at the Media Lab that shows the linkages, the social ties of people in the workplace. And it correlates that to productivity and innovation. So the yellow people, the yellow dots that are connected, are the super networkers. The people in isolation are not well networked. You get this through voice communication, text messages, emails, etc. So the goal of the workplace, people are realizing, is to strengthen those social ties that leads to productivity and innovation. We think the same thing is true in cities, particularly in these central cities that are targeted to be creative, innovative places. So I think social ties equals productivity and innovation. So we've been developing this theory of what enables innovation. We think it's actually the combination of density, proximity, and diversity. Defined broadly. Density in terms of the residential density, employment density, density of third places like cafes and shops, cultural venues. I think Central Austin's done a pretty good job of that. Proximity, we think of it as home-centric. What is the opportunities from your home to reach in close proximity a workplace or places of recreation, nature, shopping, et cetera. And diversity is really not only demographic diversity, but it's enterprise diversity, housing diversity, which is essentially the same as demographic diversity, because when you have people with broad, diverse experiences exchanging ideas, you get new ideas, typically. And then you add the new urban systems to get the good stuff without the bad stuff. So density is really tricky, very controversial, because correlated with density, if you don't do it well, are disease, loss of contact with nature, stress, traffic congestion, pollution, all kinds of bad things. If you do it well, correlated with density, higher GDP, better jobs, higher wages, better restaurants, more activity in the arts, et cetera, more patents. So we think that mobility systems, housing systems are key to managing all of this so you have the good without the bad. And if you do it well, the quality of life goes up, jobs go up, and you dramatically reduce resource consumption. So the question that we're actually asking, the fundamental question, is what enables a high-performance, livable, entrepreneurial city? Now, we picked these three very carefully. High performance is about how efficiently you use resources. Livable, of course, is quality of life, which everybody wants. And entrepreneurial is how well does it support entrepreneurship, startups, economic activity. These are the things the mayors tend to care about. So in our group, we have a number of projects to touch on aspects of it. The first that I'll talk about is mobility on demand, and we're now specifically looking at creating alternatives to private automobiles in these compact urban districts. This is a diagram of the mobility modes that we think should be found in all central cities. The most important mode by far is in the upper left, that's walking. You need to design for walking. Design for shared bikes. Austin has a bike sharing program. I actually don't know how well it works, but I see that you have it here. Increasingly, you'll have on-demand shuttles, dynamically routed shuttles without fixed routes. And then in the four boxes are the vehicles that we've worked on in our group. There's the green wheel, which is an electric hub motor with sensors and batteries that allows you to retrofit a bike into an e-bike. A little three-wheeler I talk about, folding robo-scooter that integrates with a bike-sharing program, and the folding city car that we did a few years ago. So I'll just talk about a couple of these. This was a project we started literally 10 years ago. We asked ourselves, because we weren't car designers, what does the city need in terms of a new vehicle? And we decided that the ideal vehicle had four attributes. They were all new features for a car. Robot wheels, drive motor, steering, braking, suspension in each wheel, drive-by-wire, no mechanical linkages. You get rid of useless things like engines and transmissions, so you allow the vehicle to fold, so the length of the car is the width of a conventional car, so you can get 3 to 1 in a parallel parking space, and front egress, so you step directly out onto the curb. We like to build things, and this is kind of the ultimate learning by doing, where you build something that's never been built. We build a full-scale prototype. You see the yoke that pivots left and right, where you can drive it in Paris and London the same day. And we tested this on the streets in Spain. We turned it over to one of our sponsors. They didn't make the venture work, but we've actually had 3 Chinese companies offer to commercialize it, and we're thinking about this. We launched it, by the way, at the EU headquarters in Brussels. That's the president of the EU, Barroso, who awarded us as the most interesting European-US collaboration of the time. It's our happy sponsor there in Brussels. Then I realized that actually that didn't make a lot of sense. I didn't want to work on that anymore, because most trips in central cities are only one person, and they're low speed, they're short distances. You don't need to wrap a human with thousands of pounds of high-strength steel to protect them, particularly in these central districts. So we worked on what we call the persuasive electric vehicle, this little three-wheeler that encouraged you to shift to a more sustainable mode, and also to get exercise to address the problems of obesity and other conditions that you tend to find in cities. And I realized that was not such a great idea because things were changing very quickly. Then we realized that for personal vehicles of the future, it will likely combine these three attributes: autonomy plus vehicle sharing plus electric drive. I think if you only have two of these three, it's not very interesting. In fact, private autonomous vehicles, I think, in a lot of ways will kill cities. I think they're a step backwards in many ways, and we can talk about that later if you're interested. Anyway, this was a project. MIT-Singapore Alliance will be working on this over the next couple of years. It is a golf cart, an autonomous golf cart, that will pick you up at your destination. It's like an autonomous driverless Uber system and drop you off at the destination. The students had fun developing this little video where it showed them engaged in all kinds of non-driving behaviors, just to show that actually the technology works. The impediments to this are really more of regulations, of liability, of cultural values, and business model. These are the various autonomy projects that we've been involved with at MIT, and looking at the cost of processing for autonomy. Back in 2007, the MIT entry into the DARPA Grand Challenge, which led to the Google car, the MIT vehicle had about $100,000 worth of processing. 2010, an autonomous forklift was developed, about $15,000. 2012, the golf cart vehicle had about $5,000 worth of technology, and the new vehicle that we're now working on about $500. So the cost of this technology is going down dramatically if you make a few assumptions. One of them is how you position these autonomous vehicles. This is our roadmap. I actually mentioned that we don't like roadmaps, but I think it's useful sometimes to predict where the future might go. So full autonomy, most car companies say they'll be technically able to drive in any conditions within 8 to 10 years. That's far out on the complexity scale. Urban driving a little bit sooner, suburban driving even a little bit earlier. We're interested in driving in parks and campuses. Basically, we can do that now. That was what the Singapore project was about. We're actually very interested in driving in bike lanes because we can do that in the short term, and we think that the benefit is proven. Bike sharing programs have just exploded from 4 in 2001 to 855 in 2014. We're collecting all kinds of really interesting data. This is from Paris. This shows the ebb and flow of vehicles in a bike station where blue is empty and red is full. And so this data is available to help us put together these systems. Then we realized that we were missing the mark a bit because we were focused just on moving people. We also had to focus on moving goods, particularly with the proliferation of online ordering and all the package delivery in cities. And it's interesting to see some of these solutions that you find, like this tricycle delivering packages in the city. There have been some, I think, more PR stunts like Amazon drone to deliver packages. You'll never see thousands of these in Manhattan, I guarantee it. A couple of months ago, Skype announced that they were working on a little automated delivery vehicle that you see here. So we said, well, maybe it's interesting to combine a very ultra lightweight legal bike lane vehicle to move people with a package mover. So the transformation in this case, rather than folding to save space, it transforms to move packages. So now we're working on the second version of what we call our persuasive electric vehicle, but as an autonomous people and goods mover. This is the prototype that we just finished in our lab. Now, the essential features of this is bike-like, not car-like. It's legal in bike lanes, not on highways. It operates at walking to bicycle speeds, not highway speeds. It uses very low-cost autonomy rather than very expensive autonomy like the Google car. It's a shared-use system, not a privately owned system, and it moves both people and goods. We filmed it about a month ago on the campus at MIT, and it was a lot of fun. By the way, nobody notices when you take something like this out into the campus of MIT. It happens all the time. So people were just walking by ignoring it. But here it is operating kind of in the wild. The technology all works pretty well. It operates, it's very simple technology. It only operates autonomously at low speeds. Here you see it detecting the lanes and it's looking for people. So if you walk in front of it, it will stop. The idea is that when it's moving autonomously, that's only to pick you up wherever you are or to rebalance the system. We like the idea of humans being in control of the vehicle when they're moving from point to point. The benefit is you don't have to deal with parking, et cetera. Now we've developed a whole series of versions of this. We'll be showing this at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, where I'm going tonight, as part of our collaboration with Denso, the big auto supplier. And by the way, I'll be moderating a panel with the Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, and the CEOs of Mobileye, who does the autopilot technology for Tesla, and Bosch and Qualcomm. So that should be interesting. If you're at CES on Thursday, come and join us. We also like to model these systems. So it's not just about building the technologies, but modeling their impact on the city. This is Kendall Square, where MIT is in Cambridge. If you look at the little bars there, vehicles, parking, user time, this is starting with real data. So these are vehicles moving around Kendall Square. Everything in red is a parking lot. Now, if you move to shared use systems, you can provide the same mobility with a third fewer vehicles, half the parking, so half of those red boxes go to white, so you can use them for better functions like housing and offices. If you move to shared autonomous vehicles, you essentially get rid of all the parking, provide mobility with a third the number of vehicles, and the total trip time is less because people don't have to mess with finding parking spaces, et cetera. So we think the cost-benefit ratio is pretty good. This is Kendall Square. Everything in red is showing where parking is. That's a parking lot with 45 cars. If we replace that with micro units, which I'll talk about in a minute, at the legal height limit in Cambridge, we can replace 45 cars with housings for 528 people. So it's a much higher value use of the land. So let's talk a little bit about that, about hyper-efficient places of living and work. We think of it as transformable homes and co-working to increase the diversity and also the density in cities, because I think you can't think about transportation without thinking about housing and workplaces. This is our former mayor of Menino. Menino was the first mayor to officially designate an innovation district in the waterfront in Boston. But he realized very little innovation was taking place there because there was no housing for young people. They're the lifeblood of a creative, entrepreneurial city. So he was advocating micro-units to lure young people to the waterfront. Around the same time, there were a lot of articles about cities who were courting creative people with micro-units. Could be housing's big solution. Mayor Bloomberg in Manhattan, same thing. He said, affordable housing for young people is essential to remain economically competitive. And so he was advocating a 300 square foot micro-unit. Here he's standing in that unit. And by the way, it was just a terrible apartment. They're being built right now, in my opinion. It has a pull-out sofa bed. You have to pull out every day, a double bed, tiny closet, very, very little living space, quite a nice kitchen, a huge bathroom because it had to be a legal handicap accessible bathroom. We thought we could do better. So I challenged our students to make not a 300 square foot apartment, but a 200 square foot apartment, but make it 3 times bigger. Okay? What does that mean? So what it means is to include the functionality of an apartment that was 3 times bigger. So in this apartment, we had a queen-size bed, not a little double bed. We had a fully functional office. We had a dining room for 6 people. We had a living room that could comfortably seat 6 to 8 people. We had a very compact bathroom, but that could open up to a handicap-accessible bathroom when needed. Or if you were dressing for a party, we have a very compact kitchen, but you can double the counter space to prepare a meal. And we use this as a platform to test all kinds of new technologies. Everything worked here. Nothing was faked. We were looking at hand gesture and voice recognition and touch sensors. And this is the team celebrating that it actually worked. There was a lot of fun. Now, it required us to think differently than an architect. I'm an architect, but this required us to think not in 3 dimensions alone, but in 4 dimensions. So we were thinking, so in other words, bring in the element of time. So rather than coming up with a perfect floor plan, we actually would think of transformations between 6 floor plans: living, bathing, sleeping, working, dining, cooking. And we decided that easy was not good enough. Murphy beds and sofa beds are fairly easy, but to be sustainable daily, for daily use, they need to be absolutely effortless and even magical. So that's what we were working on. We've done a series of these. This is a developer for study for an actual developer, where we have a large living room that converts to a large bedroom, in this case with a king-size bed that comes down from the ceiling, a dining space for 6 people, a separate guest room or office or walk-in closet, whatever you want at the moment. This looks out now to the city, so lots of glass and light. The kitchen can be all closed off. See, these are all renderings. It's easy for us to do renderings, but we don't think that's enough. We actually want to model and build, prototype the essential technology. So these are the essential mechatronics to allow that transformation. The couch lowers, the bed comes down from the ceiling, and everything is essentially effortless. And we've done a whole series of these. We're having a lot of fun with it. We put these out on the web, and I was surprised that they went modestly viral. We had over 1 million views in the first 3 weeks. We had developers from all over the world contact us, including one from Austin. But I had to tell them, well, this is an academic project. We can't really, take this to scale. We also worked with IKEA. They saw this. They joined our lab, gave us quite a bit of money. We're actually instrumenting a transformable apartment in Malmo, Sweden. I'll be there in a couple of weeks to talk about the next steps. We have 250 sensors in this little apartment, because understanding in a very fine-grained way the activities of people, similar to what you need to do at the scale of the city, understanding transportation patterns to design new systems is absolutely essential. These little sensors are on cabinet doors and drawers and closets and appliances, so we can look at what people are doing. In this case, that little bouncing ball, that's just the sequence of sensor firings, basically in the kitchen, which drawers and cabinets you're opening, which appliances you're using. And we can build a heat map of activity and uses, and this is all essential information to design only what people actually need and value most, and get rid of all the fluff, which in a typical home is most of it. We also did some work on applying similar ideas to the workplace. This is our city office. We mocked this up just in a couple of weeks. We had the students build this robotic furniture that, again, actually worked. And some of this is a little silly, but you can see the idea in a co-working space where you have lots of different types of organizations and people with different needs cycling through constantly. You need to rapidly reconfigure the space. There's no optimal space. So in this case, we had a teleconferencing system that would plug in. She sneezes, and the Kleenex comes. I love this, sedentary alert. She's been sitting too long, so the desk rises. It takes her over to a treadmill. And then chill mode. At the end of the day, the beer comes out and the tables fold up. Anyway, you get the idea. So lots of ways to apply that. And we have a lot of interest from companies about looking at a real application to real-world problems of those ideas. As I mentioned, we had to tell developers that we had nothing to offer. I decided to change that. We took 4 of our former students. We're launching a company. We just raised our seed funding to develop the mechatronics and the supply chain and the installation and maintenance required to take this to scale in developer apartments. We think of it as living large in a small footprint. Urban space is too valuable to be static and unresponsive. We now have agreements with 3 developers, and we hope to make this work over the next years. Okay, that's some of the solutions that we're working on related to mobility and housing. I also realized that developing these solutions wasn't enough. We had to think about the process of getting innovation into cities, of decision making, of community engagement, and I realized that there weren't good tools. I think we have some good ideas. I think a lot of people have good ideas. The question is not what are the best ideas, but how can you actually get them into cities? So we decided to develop a project we call Cityscope, evidence-based process to create more livable, high-performance entrepreneurial cities. I liked this little clip from the movie Avatar. How many of you remember this? This was my favorite part of the movie, actually. It shows people standing around a table viewing a beautiful visualization of complex three-dimensional data sets and discussing possible solutions, in this case how to kill the green men better, but I think we thought we could apply these ideas to urban planning. This is the first Cityscope that we built of Kendall Square, where MIT is. We just used Legos. Lego is one of our sponsors, by the way, so we used Lego bricks. We modeled the city. Everything in green there was the new housing we were proposing. Kendall Square functions as an innovation district, but it's very dysfunctional in that there's almost no housing for young people. It's very out of whack. It's not in balance, and we thought we'd see what happened if we put that in balance. We use an array of video projectors. It's a kind of augmented reality to then look at any number of visualizations like solar radiation, wind flows. These are the easy ones, but I'm more interested in more revealing data sets. Like this is where all the money is flowing in Kendall Square. That yellow building in the center, that bright building, is a Cambridge Innovation Center with 350 startups. It's one of the largest co-working facilities in the world. In fact, I had a delegation from Austin up a few months ago, and we took them to see that. We're interested in something similar here. So yellow is venture capital flows. Where are young people active? Well, geolocated tweets are an interesting proxy for the activity of young people. So here, one of my students sends a tweet, #Cityscope. This is a real-time feed. The Media Lab building lights up in red. This tweet is shown there. About 10% of tweets are geolocated. You can do that with. And this shows 3rd Street in the center where all the restaurants are. The Media Lab building is very bright. The computer science building is very bright. And by the way, that dark building right in the center is the Volpe Center for Transportation, a US government building, not a single tweet coming from that building. They may have a cage around it for all I know, but anyway. We can use this to model all kinds of things using algorithms we've been building. This was for a workshop in Toronto where the red bricks were residential, the blue commercial, the parking in orange. The graph there, you see the population, living population in red, the working population in blue, the supply of parking. So here what the person's doing is putting down only commercial buildings. The parking requirement goes up. He has to add a lot of parking. The traffic gets all jammed up as shown in red like Google Maps. Now what he begins to do is add residential and increases the probability that people will walk to and from work. So you can remove the parking, increase the density, and if he gets the density, proximity, diversity right, you can have a community in balance at a fairly high density without traffic congestion. So we did that. We used this for a workshop. Of course, it's highly simplified, but it was useful for the lay people, the community people that were involved in that workshop. We built a similar tool for a 1 square kilometer district in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We had some funding from there to build a planning tool. Here we have a table and we have a large display. Here we're looking at walkability, daylighting, and energy. We did a workshop some months ago with 20 urban planners, from the Riyadh Development Authority. We divided them up into 4 teams of 5 people, and they had 1 hour to design this district. And they're getting feedback, both projected down on the table and the metrics on the screen. And it was a competition to get the highest score and the best design evaluated more qualitatively. The green areas are more walkable. The red and orange are less walkable because they don't have housing and office in balance. So that was pretty interesting. Now what we're looking at, coming back to innovation districts, is using agent-based modeling to look at the actual interactions of people. These are 2 commercial buildings separated too far to have any interaction, but you bring housing in and third places, cafes, shops, and you can begin to see where people are mixing. And I think we have the potential within a few months to actually assigning an innovation potential score to a community. We have a project right outside of Barcelona, so I thought it would be fun to take the Barcelona plan, this great 19th century Cerdà plan with the big square blocks. This is where the Sagrada Familia is. We abstracted that plan into 16 blocks, each with 16 squares with buildings. Each of these buildings that you can add on the square is a database that defines the number of people, the type of people, the energy consumption, the construction cost, whatever we want to assign to it. And then we have agents, 3 agents, millennials in blue, mid-career professionals in yellow, and senior executives in red. All the young people are up where the cheap housing is, up at the top. But now as we begin to add micro units, we can see them flowing down and start to mix. And we can look at achieving some optimal mix of these blue, yellow, and red agents. It's pretty interesting. Now we have a student that's looking at what happens if you then introduce choreographed events like hackathons or festivals or South by Southwest. What does that do to the sharing of ideas and the social ties? Does it help or hurt? It's an interesting question that we're now exploring. This is the model. You can see to the left the big screen. You add a building, it shows up. This can be a hyper-realistic rendering of that building, whatever you want. You can see the agents either on the plan or the table. And we're experimenting with these tools. This is what we call a view cube. It's a little wireless tool with a gyro and accelerometer. You can fly it like a drone over the physical model. And we're always looking for tools that allow non-experts, lay people, people in the community to engage with these more powerful tools. And then to that end, we realized that we needed to reach out to cities because I was getting tired of this only being in the lab. We wanted to have a series of living lab partner cities where we can test and evaluate in real-life urban environments. Hamburg is one of our partner cities. Hamburg is expanding into the port area. They're the 2nd largest port in Europe. This is the Hafen City project, which is the biggest urban expansion in Europe right now. I've gotten to know the mayor of Hamburg quite well. Very interesting guy. He's announced that Hamburg will be, well, the article here, Smithsonian, said car-free by 2034. He corrected that. He said it's only 40% of the city that will be car-free. So, but still, that's quite ambitious. We're working on the district next to Hafen City that's been designated as an innovation district. We build a cityscope model. These are all the students from Hamburg that we're collaborating with. We'll be doing a big workshop there in 2 weeks, by the way. Should be a lot of fun. We have a project in Beijing. This is a large part of central Beijing that we're modeling with a cityscope. The former Taiwan Air Force Base in Taipei, where I'm going on Saturday. It's all pixelated here because it literally was an Air Force base until a year ago. But now they want this to be an innovation district. We're building a model there and looking at particularly transportation issues. We will be modeling, testing our little 3-wheeler, the PEV, next week with the Premier. This is the Premier standing next to me. By the way, he got his PhD in transportation at MIT. So he's an old friend. And he's very supportive of our little 3-wheel vehicle because Taiwan does not produce cars, but they have the most sophisticated bicycle industry in the world. So he's a strong proponent of these bike-like, not car-like autonomous vehicles. In fact, we'll get him to ride it on Sunday. And then the last project I'll show you is a project we did in Boston. Boston has proposed a very ambitious BRT scheme, bus rapid transit scheme, with 5 new lines, and they're considering developing that according to the gold standard of BRT systems. How many of you know what the gold standard of BRT systems are? You guys are transportation people, you should know this. Well, it's quite simple. They're buses that operate more like subways than buses. You have a central station, you pay at a turnstile, go into an enclosed station, the bus pulls up, all the doors open, you step on a level platform, you have designated lanes. They're controversial in many cities because, of course, it takes away car lanes. And the question is not how to design a gold level BRT station, but how to engage with the community so they can make informed judgments about what is the right mix of features. And there are many different alternatives. So we worked with funding from the Barr Foundation to develop 3 different city scopes. We have one at the regional scale to look at the impact of a BRT system to a community or an individual at the scale of the community. For example, you can see how many jobs do you now have access to within a 30-minute commute, or how will this shorten your commute from point to point? We built a model at the community scale where people could see the impact on their entire community with respect to traffic, bicycles, et cetera. And then for Dudley Square, which was the main station, we had a street scale city scope. Now, as people experiment with different alternatives, we have these displays that update in real time. So the number of cars that are shifted per day, that's shifted from roads to buses. The number of passengers it accommodates, what happens to speed, the cost, et cetera, CO2. So a little video. Now this shows people from the community. We did a series of workshops. We tended to have 20 people at a time come in. Here she's seeing how it impacted her personally in the region. Now here people are looking at different alternatives at the scale of the community and seeing what happens locally, and then what happens at the scale of the street. These are the stations on either side, not gold standard, not in the center. You add the station to the center, you add bike lanes, et cetera. And so in this process, we weren't advocating for a particular solution. We were building the tools to allow the community, in partnership with people from the city, to get feedback from the community. And for me, it was a great lesson because it was extremely positive and creative. It wasn't the typical process where somebody presents a proposal and then one by one people come up to the microphone and oppose it and scream at the presenter, frankly, most of the time. So we're hoping that we can find a way to take these ideas to scale. And by the way, we've talked with Austin about being one of our partners, and I hope one day that works out. So my final message is just remember, with all these issues, when you're thinking about cities and transportation, cities are for people. Don't design for machines. Don't design for cars and buses. Design for people. And then there's a whole world of fabulous technology that you can add when useful. Thank you. So I'm told that I can take some questions. If anybody has questions, I don't know how we do this. Should we just ask for questions?
If you have questions, you can also tweet them to hashtag TTF2016, or we can come to you if you raise your hand.
Don't be shy. One right there.
You talk about the transformation of urban place, and I just wonder, since so many urban areas now are dominated by small cities, edge cities, and suburban areas, what do you think the impact is on those areas as this transformation takes place?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, and I don't think anybody has a really good answer for it. I did have an interesting meeting with a couple of mayors recently. One was Mayor Reed from Atlanta, another Andy Burke from Chattanooga. And I know what a lot of the mayors are thinking about, certainly in Boston, is developing, which means changing the zoning, more high-density nodes in the suburban areas that can be served well with mass transit, and that can create, in effect, a little microcity. So rather than having a hub and spoke system with the center and then low-density extension, to have a series of micro-cities that surround the central city, which are more integrated, where people can live and work and play, but then are connected back to the central city by rail. I think it's a lot easier for European cities to do this the way that they evolved hundreds of years ago. Zurich, for example, is a great implementation of this, because they have central Zurich, but they have a whole series of villages around it, and they've invested in great rail networks so people can live in the village in a quiet, peaceful environment with a distinctive character, but then in a matter of 15, 20 minutes get into the central city. And I think over time, with creative planning, good transportation networks, and a commitment to challenge the existing zoning status quo, I think that could evolve, but that may be wishful thinking.
Okay, and we have a question from Twitter from @JWildMusic. He says, young people are ready for the innovations that you show at MIT. So how do you plan to overcome politicians and others' resistance to change?
Okay. Well, I mean, that's not for me to do, but we can play a role in that. I actually think that most of the creative energy is found in cities. I'm very confident that the mayors will find the right solutions. I mean, mayors are really interesting animals. They're less ideological. They have to solve problems. They have to make sure that the potholes are fixed and the snow is plowed and the garbage is dealt with. As you go from mayors to state governments, it becomes more dysfunctional, and when you get to the federal government, even more so typically. And so I think if we could empower our mayors to make these decisions, I think we would be fine. I worry about roadblocks at the higher levels.
Question about the different vehicles you showed us. They're all in great weather conditions.
Yeah.
What is the additional pressure or need to work with those who would be managing the infrastructure so that those vehicles could still operate in adverse weather conditions?
Right.
Or do you feel that is not as much of an issue because the vehicles are more capable than perhaps they appear when they're out there on a nice sunny day?
Yeah, well, no, that's a great question, and that's a big challenge. There are a couple of ways to come at that. One is by having infrastructure in the city that communicates with these vehicles. We have talking with Philips about a project to put sensing cameras and communication infrastructure in fixed points, basically street lights in the city. So the vehicle wouldn't have to figure out anything. Or wouldn't have to figure out as much. They'd obviously have to figure out their local conditions, but they'd know precisely where they were and where other vehicles were, which would help, for example, when the clearly marked lanes that I showed are covered with snow. Another way to come at it is by just through better maintenance. I spent one winter in Helsinki, where I had a visiting position there at the university, and people continued to ride their bikes all winter in Helsinki, and they just made sure every morning the bike lanes were cleared. And it was a very straightforward operation. They had very small snow plows, and early in the morning they would just go scrape them clean and put down salt, and people would ride their bikes all winter. So I think it's some combination of good design. All of these things are good design, good public policy, and good technology.
First of all, thank you for a very inspiring presentation. But as a grandfather, I wonder, what do the young families with young children, where do they go to play?
Yeah. Well, you know, I see in European cities where they have good housing policy and commitments to parks and infrastructure in a way that we don't tend to in this country. I see cities there as a great environment for raising children. I think there can be a lot more opportunities for kids in cities than you find in some suburbs. It's not the suburbs are a bad place to raise kids. I think they're great. I was raised in a suburb, but I think there are ways to make cities highly livable for young people and safe. In fact, one of our sponsors I mentioned is Lego. They are in Billund, Denmark, and there is a project now to turn the city of Billund into the capital of children. And we are helping them think through what does that mean to design a city from the point of view of children where they can go anywhere safely and have access to the kind of play environments that they need. So again, it's all in the implementation. I don't think cities are either good or bad either way.
So, Mr. Larson, we've got time for one more question.
Great.
Anyone else have another question out there?
What? Hacking. Yeah, hacking's a problem. But I mean, I think hacking's a problem when it comes to our electrical grid and our banking system, and you know, and essentially everything else we deal with in life. So it's a technical problem that has to be solved. I think one issue that we've been talking with companies about, you know, with respect to autonomous vehicle technology, right now it's the wild, wild west. And I think it should be, because each company is just charging ahead, doing their own thing, trying to create highly functional, safe, secure, affordable technology. But at some point, you know, we will have to converge on industry standards, and that will have to involve dealing with these kind of security issues. And nobody knows how this will play out. It's a really interesting world out there right now. I think these next 5, 8, 10 years will be extraordinarily interesting. And I think the people that are working on this problem are good enough. They'll get there. So we'll see. Thank you.